Hi, everybody. Welcome to A Taste of Italy with Dave. It's so nice to see you here. And there are cookies, and also you can get tea. There's hot water over there for tea if you like, and there's also water, so help yourself to that. And I want to welcome you all this evening. I'm Jean, and so Dave's company is Therapy Gardens, and I'm going to let him tell you about it. That's what he wanted me to do. It's a great company. And I just want to tell you our next food programs as part of the series, July 18th, A Taste of Israel, and August 15th, which is our last one, regional favorites from yesterday and today. So I hope you'll come back for another session. And I want to thank the Friends of the Milton Public Library for their support of my programs. And please join me in a warm welcome for Dave Williams.
Hi, everybody. Hi. It is great to see so many of you back from last. I didn't scare you away, so thank you. That's great. So, and if you're new, if you haven't come to a Therapy Gardens, I'm starting to call them events. So if you haven't come to it sounds like more sophisticated, right? If you haven't come to a Therapy Gardens event in the past, welcome this time. So, so if you're not familiar with Therapy Gardens, we're a small company. We based out of Brockton. We work primarily with senior centers, municipal organizations, libraries, garden clubs, things like that. And we do a whole host of workshops on cooking and gardening and healthy living and all that kind of stuff. And then we have a couple of other things that we do that I'll chit-chat, throughout the night as we go. Should we maybe hit the lights a little bit so do you think for the front? Yeah, do you mind? Yeah, if you don't mind, yeah. Yeah, how's that? I look better in the dark, Jean. Yeah, there you go. That's good. How's that? Good? Can you guys see? Okay. Off. They like it. They want to. I look much better in the dark. See? Aren't I better looking already? So this is interesting for me, and hopefully for you. This is the first time I've actually done this particular presentation. And one of the things I'll kind of let you, I'll give you a little peek behind the curtain. So one of the things that we do is we're in the business of marketing, ideas and presentations and experiences and all that. And that involves coming up with new things because no one wants to come to the same presentation over and over and over again. So we do that. We find other people. Ann Bishop is here, a resident of Milton. She's going to, join forces with us and do some workshops with us. And then what happens over time is you get confident and you say, all right, I know this will sell. So I put it in the catalog, but I don't make the presentation until I've sold a few, right? So because sometimes you put them in the catalog and it doesn't sell. So this one, I put it in, and I've advertised it under a couple different names because you play around with things too, whatever. And it sold immediately, and it's been weighing on my mind, and I'm like, I need to really get going on this. And it ended up taking a little bit of a left turn, and there's tons of recipes that I'm going to give you, tons. And I'm happy to email them all to you if you want. You can grab my card and just shoot me an email. If you want to take pictures of them up here, that's great. But through the process of researching some of these recipes, I learned a lot about myself and my own cooking habits. So I'm hoping I'm going to be able to impart a little bit of that to you today. And with that, if there are questions or insults or anything like that, just shout them right out. How do I do this? There we go. So we're going to jump right in. And the very first thing, has anyone here ever been to Italy? Okay, great. Oh, awesome. How many people northern Italy? Southern Italy? Both? Central Italy? That seems to get forgotten, right? Yeah, okay. All right, great. So some people, it looks like you went all around Italy. That's great. So it's on my list of places to go. And the really interesting thing, I've followed Italy for a while. I've always been kind of interested in, I love countries that are, their politics are like rough and tumble. You know, like Israel, the last 3 prime ministers of Israel are in jail. We might have a president going, you know, who knows? But, you know, you look at Italy, and they're a perfect example of each region kind of does its own thing. And the state say, oh, we have to all do this. And they don't really pay attention. They just kind of go around doing their own thing. So I've always kind of admired that about Italy. And because of that, there are tons of similarities and differences between the regions. So, and that's a good thing. And I kind of had this moment the other day. I was driving. One of the great things about this job is I see all of Massachusetts now. And I get to go all over the place. And when I don't have something afterwards and it's an afternoon one, I set the GPS for back roads and I just take my time going home, and I love it. And I found so many cool places and, you know, some lunch places along the way, you know, stuff like that. But I had this moment one day. I drove by a plaza, and it had Michael's, Home Depot, GameStop, TJ Maxx, you know, which you can see anywhere, you know. And I'm like, it ruined the local flavor of that town for me. You know, it was Hudson that I was in, you know, and it was a really nice little town, but it really kind of ruined it for me. So I'm aware of that, and I admire that about Italy, is that they've been able to preserve their kind of local traditions, which I think is great. If you are interested more in Italy, which apparently you are because you're here, if you haven't seen the Stanley Tucci series, you have to watch that. Oh, right? I mean, it's just awesome. First season's better than the second season, I think, but the second season's good. But you really do learn a lot about that. Okay, well, they drove by. All right. So for a lot of people, when you talk about Italy, you know, it comes down to the north versus the south, and people will say, oh, the north is all cream sauces and the south is all tomato sauces. And much of that is true. You know, a lot of that stuff is rooted in truth. But when you really dig into the country, you start to see that there's a lot of differences. So the first thing, you know, when you're talking about Italy, and I've had a tough couple weeks with presentations, being someone who enjoys my Italian heritage. I gave a presentation a few weeks ago about basil. And I thought for sure, I love basil. I said, oh, it must have been from Italy. Basil is from India, not Italy. So then tomatoes, I was like, oh, it's got to be Italy. Tomatoes, South America. Pasta, you can see, this is why I accented the beginnings. China gets you know, some respect for the beginnings of pasta. They kind of figured out that you can you know, put things into this a pasta-like shape. But it was the Romans that had a dish that they called lagana, which was a flat dough that they boiled. Which, you know, when you think about lasagna, you start to see the connection. And then modern pasta, what we eat today, was developed in Italy. So I'm giving Italy like you know, a partial credit for pasta. But it was the drying that was the big thing then. And in fact, you know, that was in the Middle Ages, everything spoiled, or they covered it with salt. So to have a food source that you could keep dry was a big deal. And then all throughout Italy, you know, as those of you who have been there, you see that there are different pasta shapes and sizes and styles. And at one point, about 6 or 8 months ago, I had considered doing like one of these workshops on just pasta. I was just kind of deep dive pasta. And my head almost exploded. There's just so much to it. I was like, I can't do it. It'd have to be a course or something. So when you look at pasta in Italy and pasta today, you know, the large pastas are for the, you know, the ziti, and what's there on the left is, I guess you say, a paccheri. And those are for the heartier sauces, for the bologneses, and something that can, you know, the sauce stands up to the pasta and the pasta stands up to the sauce. The thinner, longer ones are more for the, you know, the sauce-based stuff, the tomato sauce, cream sauces. And then little pasta, pastina. And that's all, pastina just means little pasta. Even though there is a brand out there, pastina, it's really like cini di pepe and all those different types of pastas. But pastina for me is just a great catch-all. So then when you get to tomatoes, you know, again, you know, in my naivete, I was certain that Italy, you know, oh, they must have, you know, what am I, naive, thinking that because we cook with tomatoes now that, you know, they've been there for millennia? No. So they came from South America, and they were brought by Spanish conquerors, and they actually were shunned at first in Europe, and they were seen as poisonous. They They were definitely thought to be poisonous, and they were an ornamental plant. They really weren't anything edible. No one really thought about eating them. And then all of a sudden, Naples, Italy, in the Campania region, started becoming known for their tomatoes, and that's the San Marzanos that you hear about, right? Because they're grown in Campania, which is about 20 miles from Naples, and that's the volcanic ash from Mount Vesuvius and all those things that give that the flavor. That's why you can only get a certified San Marzano, from Italy, from Campania. You can you see them in the nurseries. They label them, San Marzano. It's just a shape. It's just a sauce tomato is all it is. It's not a real San Marzano. So then the people from Naples, the Neapolitans, they continued on, and they eventually invented pizza. So that was the first pizza was from Naples, Italy. The Neapolitan pizza was the very first pizza. So remember when I said these things change as you go. So when I sat down to put this together, I had all my recipes, and I was ready. It was going to be just more or less a straightforward, like those of you that were here for the Mediterranean one, it was going to be kind of like that. And then it kind of took this turn when I started researching Naples. And I said, I don't know much about Naples, but there's some talk in my family of Naples. So it's located in Campania, which is the southern region. And it was founded by ancient Greeks, Neapolis, makes sense, right? They invented pizza. They have the San Marzano tomatoes. They really have a lot going for them. But my grandfather was also from Naples, right? And that was hanging. He's cute. That was hanging in his house, which my brother lives in now. For a while, he left it up. And if you look, I took a picture of it. You can see me. You can see my phone on the lower left by to the left of his chin. You see that? Yeah. So I'm not a photographer. I'm not a great photographer. But and that picture was surprising to me because it had never hung in his house. My brother found it when he moved in and was cleaning stuff, and he was like, "Oh, this is kind of cool." And he hung it up there, and he didn't even know it was our grandfather until someone told him. And obviously he never appeared that way to me. That was well before I was born. So that was probably in the 30s, taken probably back then. So he came over from Italy, from Naples, from the Campania region, sketchy on the details, not a lot of, paperwork was involved then. A lot of folks were fleeing Europe after World War I, and there was noise being made, about another wars coming and things like that. So he settled, him and his family. He was only about 3 or 4, I believe, when they got here, and they all stayed. And that's what kind of got me thinking about that. Here's what kind of the left turn took, as I started thinking about my mother grew up in the house. He grew up there. He lived there his whole life. He raised his children there. My brother is there now. My brother owns the house now. But their whole family stayed there, and we were the only ones that kind of moved out. My mother my father was from Avon. They left Everett, and we ended up settling in Avon and then Brockton. So I was never really a part of that in the Italian part of the family, as far as they would, it was over the bridge. So it was kind of, my grandfather would remind us, it was one of his memories, is we'd go on a Sunday to have Sunday dinner, and this is going back a while, and he would, the kids would be jumping up and down, and towards the end of the day, he'd be getting sick of them. And he would walk up to my mother and he would go, "Here's 50 cents for the bridge." And that meant go home. So they all stayed, the family stayed, and he worked his entire life as a chef in the North End. And he worked at the European, which is still there. And as a matter of fact, when he passed away, this is in 1986, he passed away. We went there after the funeral, and the maitre d' recognized my grandmother and remembered her. So very, very interesting. And then as a child, we ate Sunday dinners. Almost every Sunday, we went to their house to have dinner. And that was him. As those are undated. The one on the right that's how I remember him. That's to me was how he looked to me. But one of the things that I realized is that trickled down. His style of cooking, when you started looking into Naples and Neapolitan, and I started Now, as an adult, I'm 53, I'm a little slow. It took me a while to figure some things out from my childhood, but I realized not only did I miss that, and I've been trying to recreate those Sunday dinners for years. I can't get people to come along with me because of football. But I realized that the food we ate was Neapolitan food, all of it. And then I started thinking about the food my mother made, and I realized, I hadn't realized what a connection we had to that food. And my mom passed away a couple years ago, and this is, if you can believe it, I seem to have inherited all the family photos. I have boxes, thousands of photos. My mother was probably the best cook that I ever knew in my life. She cooked several times a day, all day. I could not find one picture of her in the kitchen. I found pictures of everything else, her doing, playing around on her cell phone and all, just anything else you could possibly think of. But for some reason, I just couldn't find any in the kitchen. This is the closest I could come, was this cutting with somebody's birthday. I don't know who. But my mother, yeah, maybe it might have been her nursing graduation. Yeah, actually, I bet it was. Yeah, the cap. You don't see the caps anymore, right? And then when I was a kid, my mom worked for St. Joseph's Manor, the nursing home, and at the time, the nuns then had those habits that were right around your face, right? They pushed your face out like that, yeah. But my mom was more of an adventurous cook, but I realized that she was always that Italian influence was always with her and is now always with me. And just as a quick example, when I was thinking about it, she insisted every holiday there was always a pasta course. There was always the first one, and it was always like two little raviolis. And I remember saying as a child, this is dumb. Why are we doing this on Thanksgiving? And I realize now why we do it. You get older, it's important, those things. So, only recently, like I said, I'm a little slow. So it took me a while to figure out that, these things are in me too. So the first probably 6 or so of these are the foods that absolutely bring me right back. These are the ones that I've spent my adult life, probably the past 10 years of my life, trying to master and get better at and cook them the way that they were, or the way that I seem to remember them. Sometimes we romanticize things. But this was one of the first things, was this idea of chicken soup with pastine in it. That's a very Italian thing, to take a small pasta and put it in a chicken soup. That had been done, the large pastas, the Asian countries and things like that, but to kind of shrink it down to that, that's where they really shined. But I'll never forget, this was an occurrence at my grandparents' house. They would get chickens and boil them up, and I have very vivid memories of her spreading newspapers out on the kitchen table and all the boiled chicken and just picking every last little tiny bit. And again, these were Depression era folks, so this wasn't, somebody like me, I think I mentioned it in one of the last things. So I make a lot of chicken soup, I make a lot of chicken stock. A lot of times I just throw the meat away. If my grandmother or grandfather saw that, I'd be in big trouble. But again, this was always, this was part of my childhood. It was really, really an important part of my childhood. And then you had this. You've heard this called a bunch of different names, right? So the true name is pasta fagioli, or the second one, pasta fazool. That's in Naples. They use that. That's the name. So it's either pasta fagioli or pasta fazool, one of those two. The third one, I would call that like pigeon Italian. So that's now, and I heard that a lot growing up, even though I wasn't around as many Italian people as my cousins and things, but you used that. And where it came from was, do you know where it came from? You've heard it, right? Yeah. Pasta fazool. It's really not a word. A lot of the people that came over from Italy weren't even literate in Italian, never mind English. So, and what started happening is and that's where a lot of these Italian pronunciations came from. For example, a lot of the first generation Italian Americans never spoke any Italian. So, and a really good example of that in the fictional world is The Sopranos, right? People have watched The Sopranos, and they live this Italian lifestyle. But when you listen to their terms that they use, gabagool, right? You've heard them say that, gabagool, right? You know what that is. It's capicola. But they just say gabagool because they didn't know how to pronounce it anyway. You know what I mean? So though a lot of those and I don't know if that's appropriate to call them pigeon Italian, but that's kind of what I call it. But that's where that pasta vazul comes from. But at the end of the day, it just means pasta and beans. So this is the one that you would see. You see a ton of different versions of this, but this is the classic one with the ditalini. And this is one of those things that, Gene, is there any way we could shut this? Gene? Yeah, thank you. The minute I say something, they stop every time. Maybe they heard me. Is there a hospital near here? Good to know. So this one, very authentic Italian. You can use vegetable broth or chicken broth. It doesn't really matter. You want to keep as with most things, keep the pasta separate until you actually are going to eat it. So you make the pasta separately and then just put a little in the bottom of the bowl and ladle the rest over. But this was something like, for us in our household, this was a quick weeknight dish. We need to make dinner quick. What are we going to make? It was this. This was kind of like our, what's that, hamburger helper type stuff, right? Yeah, kind of like that. And this next one is brajol. It's pronounced brajol. Yeah, it's one of my favorites. It's absolutely one of my favorites. It's sometimes difficult to find the right meat to, and by the way, you can use any meat if you want. You could use chicken, you could use turkey. Beef is the classic traditional way of doing it. But I have really fond memories of my mother and I making brajol together, and she would make a big one. She would get one big piece of beef and just roll a big one and then slice it at the table. I tend to get the smaller ones now, mainly because I cook for myself, and they freeze perfectly. You just make them, put a little sauce over them, put them in a little container, put them in the freezer. They freeze perfectly, and they're great for like one portion. So have found myself using these for a lot of that. And you could put anything you want in the middle of them. You can put prosciutto, you can put Parmesan cheese, you could put provolone cheese if you wanted, and then when they're done, so that's yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's cooked now.
There it is. Yeah. Yeah. No. So what you do is you roll them like that. So you make your little bundles and then you brown those. Now that one had toothpicks. I use butcher's twine. Yeah, it's supposed to be twine. And I took my own pictures, by the way, but I'll tell you something. It's a double-edged sword. The iPhone takes an awesome picture. It takes one of the best pictures ever, but it shows every little flaw, right? So then I started getting obsessed with it, so sometimes I just download stuff off the internet just to be quick about it. But yeah, twine you should use butcher's twine instead of toothpicks. But so great question. So you use the traditional is top round, so thin sliced top round. But even their thin sliced, I pound it still, because you want it really, really thin. You want it as thin as it can be and still hold stuff without bursting.
Can you go back and show the first one? Because when it was raw, I wasn't sure what it was.
Oh, okay, yeah. I think I can. I don't know how to go back on this. That's all right. We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out together. Well, maybe we won't.
That's all right.
Yeah, all right. Sorry. Yeah, we can go back at the end. So, any other questions on the brajol? But you can also, like I said, use the top round. But you can use eye round. You can use bottom round. You could use flank if you really wanted to. But the idea, you don't want a lot of fat. You want it to be lean. So, sausage and peppers. So this is again very, very Italian. I don't cut them into little pieces. Like, for example, when you go to like catering places and things like that, they do that because it cooks faster. That's really why they do it. And it's easier to portion out. So I keep them whole, but lately I've been using chicken sausage, and it's been great. It's worked really good. I never use green peppers. I don't like them. So I always use either orange or yellow or red. And the key here is that little bit of red wine. So what you do is you brown up the sausages and then you take them out. And then you put just the garlic. Put a little bit of garlic in there, right? Let it sizzle. Then put the red wine, let that sizzle away. Then throw your onions, your peppers in there. Let them get really, really nice and soft. Then put the peppers back in and cover it, and when the wine is pretty much gone, everything's done. That's the way to do it. That's the classic way to do it. And the classic herb is oregano. You know, that's oregano seems to be that herb that can stand up to, you know, pork or, you know, sausage and things like that. So so that's how you make those. And like I said, they're a fantastic dish.
Sir,
Yes.
could you just put the box top?
Oh, I sure can. Yeah. You know, I'm watching my sugar. I had to drive over here with these cookies. I had to put them in the back seat. All right, so, you know, meatballs. One of the things that, like, for example, like I said, I'm watching my sugar. So I watch my carb intake now. I rarely eat pasta, very, very rarely. So one of the things that I do to feel like I'm having an Italian meal is I make meatballs and I'll have a salad with it, you know, and a Greek salad or something like that. And that kind of makes me feel like I'm having an Italian meal, you know, even though I miss the pasta. But meatballs are one of those things, everyone has their way that they do them. You know, I've found for just a basic meatball recipe, and you can do anything after, you can add to you can take away from this too if you want. But this is a really good one. Half beef, half pork. That's traditional too. I know a lot of people put the veal as well. And that's fine if you get that mix, or, you know, if you feel like, you know, doing that's fine, and that makes a great meatball too. But I like just the pork and the beef. Meatloaf, I add the veal in. You know, and again, the rest of it is just general stuff. And if you want to, you can season it more from there. You can add more spice if you wanted to. You could, you know, any dehydrated things, whatever you wanted to add. You could add more cheese, less cheese. But once you've done this, now you have that kind of basic recipe for a meatball. Here's the thing, a lot of people brown their meatballs before they put them in a sauce. I stopped doing that, and they're better. They're better. So I brown everything else. So you'll see in the final recipe when I do how I do my spaghetti sauce, I brown the pork, I brown all that. But I used to brown the meatballs, and they were good. I'm not saying they were bad, but I had a friend of mine who didn't brown them, and I was like, what'd you do different to these meatballs? And she told me I stopped browning them, and I did the same thing, and I like them better. And I think it makes the sauce taste a little better too, to be honest with you. Yeah, it sure does. Yeah, browning stuff is a pain in the neck. But this is, again, a great meal if you're watching your sugar or your carbs or something like that. And you get to control what you put in it too, you know, so that's even better. Yeah.
So you just put the meatball in the sauce and have it cooked out.
That's it. Yep. Yep, right in. I just make the meatball, and don't compact them really tight either. You know, keep them loose, put them right in, because they're going to expand a little bit in there. All right. So this, I call this half-baked eggplant because I've experimented with this over and over and over again because I really like the round discs because it's easy. It's easier to like brown them and all that stuff. And I was trying to do baking without any browning, and it just is soggy every time. It just does, it's never the same. So that's why I call this one half-baked. So what I do is I brown it. I just lightly brown it with a non-stick. Yeah, you know, it's like people think it's, you know, weed eggplant or something, but marijuana eggplant. And then I just, you know, I just lightly brown it, and then I bake it the rest of the way.
Couldn't you do that in a air fryer?
You could. I don't use, yeah, thank you, Ann. You absolutely could. And I have not jumped on the air fryer bandwagon yet. And I know I probably should. My hesitancy is I just don't want another appliance right now. You know, I mean, my kitchen is just filled with stuff. But you absolutely could. All of these things you could do air fryers with instead of, you know, top sautéing or baking, right?
I just say that because for Christmas, my son and his wife got me the biggest air fryer.
Oh, okay.
to hand.
Yeah.
So I had to try using it, but it's really good for stuff like
I've heard it's great. I have. So, you know, again, I like the little discs. I think that really works well. Here it does, at least it does. So you know, sometimes the simplest things taste the best, you know. And one of the things, like I told you, I'm cutting out pasta or trying to. Every once in a while, I get a craving for it. And I know if I have it with a red sauce, I'll just I'll cook the whole pound of it, you know. I know I will. But if I'm doing something like this, I know I'll just cook just a little bit for me, because you really can't eat a lot of this. So the oil, at least I can't eat a lot of it because of the oil. So this is kind of my go-to when I want to have a little bit of pasta, but I don't want to feel like, bloated, like I eat too much. So spaghetti alla puttanesca. So this, the anchovies are optional. I actually like them. I never thought I would say that. I found myself, I think I mentioned at the Mediterranean one, I've also started developing a taste for sardines. I never used to like them. And I found myself the other day, it was like 2 months ago, and I opened up some and I had a cracker and I put it on a cracker and I went, oh my God, I'm my grandfather. Because, right, that's what they used to do. They just dump it right on a rich cracker, or a saltine, or whatever it was they did. But so yeah, I gotta work on that. But the anchovies really do help, and I use pitted black olives. You're supposed to use that. Like my grandfather would probably be mad at me for this. I like the Kalamata olives better. I can't help it. I'm not a big black olive fan. I prefer the Kalamatas. But they also have the most sodium. So, and then capers. So that's the other thing. There's a lot of sodium in this because capers have a lot of sodium too. But it does add a lot of flavor. It's a really, really flavorful dish. So this means hunter. Cacciatore means hunter in Italian. So this is what, when the hunters would go out and catch the game, this is what they would make for themselves out there. And that's why you cook it with the bones in it, and obviously the flavor and things like that. But that's the traditional way to do it. And it's traditionally you use the thighs and the drumsticks, and then you just add whatever else you want. I would do it like this with the red bell pepper. That was always my turn-off to chicken cacciatore, was the green bell pepper. I just don't care for green bell pepper. I don't put it in any red sauce. I don't put it in anything. They're unripe, right? I mean, that's what green bell peppers are. They're unripe red peppers. That's why people have such problems digesting them. Yeah, right? Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. No one knew that, huh? Oh, all right. All these, there's these websites that you learn things. There's a whole bunch that I learned. Like the tab on a soda can, like you're supposed to put the straw through it. I didn't, that's what it's for. Yeah, like all these weird things. Yeah, I'm not sure why we're not working here. There we go. So risotto is here because I started feeling bad for Central Italy because I came from working in the public sector, so I'm very aware of diversity. So I actually was counting the meals, and I was going, how many do I have from the north? How many do I have from the side? I was trying to balance it out, and then I was like, I don't have any from Central Italy. So I went and found some stuff that I've done with risotto. And again, this is just a basic one. You could add anything you wanted to. After this, you could add seafood. Just get it to this level. And the key to this is gradually adding the broth when it's warm. That's the key. Everything needs to be warm so it sucks everything up and kind of keep it moving. But then once you've done that, once it's sucked up that liquid, you can add anything you want to it. So it can be a very flavorful dish if you do it right. I guess the doing it right part is the key, right? Come on, David, what's going on here? There we go. So I have a couple different recipes for sauces, and I have the different recipes for different types of tomatoes, and different things you might encounter. This is a really good one if you want a fresh marinara sauce if you have fresh tomatoes, right? So it's a really, really good one for that. You blanch the tomatoes, and if you're not familiar with blanching, all you're doing is just dropping them in boiling water for like 30 seconds till the skin's split, and then slip the skins right off. That's it. And you can cut a little X in the skin before you do it, and then they'll just slip right out of that X. And so once you do that, let them cool, and you kind of chop them up. And what I found with these is I used to make this. I'd make a big, huge batch, and then I'd process it, put it in my canner, put it on the shelf, and it took all day long. now I just freeze it, and it lasts just as long, because honestly, it's gone by the end of the winter, right? So why waste all that time canning it when it's going to be just as good frozen 6 months from now as it is canned? In fact, sometimes it's better frozen, I think.
How do you freeze it?
So how do you freeze it? That's kind of a loaded question. So you always use these jars if you're going to freeze. Use the wide mouth. If you're going to use glass, use wide mouth. Don't use the ones that get narrow, those shoulders. That's where they crack. So, oh, sure you can. Yeah, glass is fine, and if it's better, it's preferable. I like it better than plastic. Yeah. So I use the only drawback to glass is it takes up a lot of room. So like mason jars take up quite a bit of room. But I freeze most of my stuff in mason jars, and then I just take the metal lids off when I want to. Throw it in the microwave, and that's that. But you can also freeze it in plastic bags. If you have the patience, and you can get those Glad bags that stand up, like they open at the bottom kind of. They're not perfect, but they stand up, and then you can ladle it in, you seal it, and then you can lay it flat in your freezer, and you can have more room that way. You use the space a little bit better. So that, and then you could just freeze, you could make a whole spaghetti sauce and put everything in it and freeze it. Not the spaghetti, but the fixins, the meatball, you can freeze the meatballs, But this I found, this is really, I'm not a huge fan of I don't measure out a lot of spices. I do, this will do, that'll do, whatever. This one I tend to measure out a little bit. I've just found that particular blend of spices seems to work really well. And, the fresh basil, just put it in at the end. But this is great for freezing. No, mine's the very last one you're going to see, and you're going to be surprised. It's not at all complicated that you would think it is. So, and it's just mine, so it might suck to you. So, yeah.
Are there any substitutions for oregano?
Sure. Thyme. Use. There's great question. Substitutions for oregano. You absolutely use thyme. Marjoram sometimes. Although it's distinctive. I wouldn't use it in a red sauce, but you could get away with it in a chili or a chicken dish or something like that. But thyme is my go-to. If I don't have anything else, I just use extra thyme. Yeah, so anyway, this is really good. You want to simmer it for the 40 minutes. That's kind of key. You want to give it time to blend together. And a lot of times it's better the next day. We know that, right? Chilies and sauces and stews, they're almost always better the next day. All right, so this next one, so this pomodoro means tomato, right? So this is just a very, very simple tomato sauce, but you use a lot of olive oil. But I don't put the amounts here because the amount of olive oil in this one is up to you. This is to your taste. And we were just talking about the bruschetta that you made, and you said it calls for, you could put more or less or whatever. You kind of went medium with it, right? So you do that with this. But if you really, if you want to put, a lot of olive oil, that's where you get that orangey color. So it's an oily, sauce, but it's delicious. It's really good. And olive oil, although it's high in calories, is not necessarily bad for you. It just has some calories, You have to watch for that. When I use minced garlic, I almost always buy the jarred minced garlic now. I can't be bothered with, not that I have anything else to do, but, fresh basil leaves makes all the difference in the world. Simmer it, do your thing. You can blend it or not blend it. I don't, but you can. A lot of my main sauce at the end that I'm going to show you is that one I blend usually. But you don't have to. You absolutely don't have to.
The fresh basil leaves.
Yep.
Can you freeze them?
So basil, great question. Can you freeze fresh basil leaves? Yes. So you could do it a couple ways. The easiest way to do it is to cut them into ribbons and put them in an ice cube tray and either put olive oil in the ice cube things or water and just freeze that and then just pop them out and put them in a bag when they're frozen. They won't be totally, the water will be solid. The oil will be, it'll stay, it won't be totally solid, but it'll stay, not stick to the other ones. But that's how I save my basil. But you could also just blanch it and freeze it flat if you wanted to. So just throw it in boiling water for 30 seconds, right? Pull it out, lay it flat on some paper towels, and then just layer it with a paper towel in between each one and put it in the freezer. Or even better would be wax paper. All right?
Can I ask
Yeah.
why we blanch? Is it to get
So blanching, it just kind of cooks it a little bit. It makes it so that it's not brittle. No, it's not. No, because the freezer would pretty much get rid of most of the germs anyway. So yeah, you don't have to blanch everything, but like you should blanch tomatoes before you do it. But some things you don't have to. But it just makes them freeze better. Yeah.
Do you use plum tomatoes or just any tomatoes?
So that's a great question. So I use sauce plum tomatoes. I use sauce tomatoes, plum tomatoes. I think I have the canned ones that I use, but that I here. If I don't have them, I just use the San Marzanos in the yellow can Cento. And I use for crushed. I always use whole unless it's just me, and then I'll buy crushed. And I base that on no evidence other than my logic is I think, well, if I were a tomato manufacturer, right, and I had piles of tomatoes, and I had ones that looked really, really, really great, and they looked delicious, and I would say, well, those would be the whole tomatoes. And then I had ones that were a mess and looked terrible. I would say, well, crush those up and put those in the crush can. So that's it. I don't know if that's true or not, but it makes sense to me, and I think I know corporate America a little bit. I think that's probably what they would do. So, but yeah, it does. So sauce tomatoes is the way to go. If you use other tomatoes, which you certainly can, just take the seeds out, because the seeds will do two things: make it bitter and watery. All right, but
So in that marinara or whatever, it was
Yep.
a couple of back, where you said
Yep.
6 to 8 tomatoes, you're talking about 6 to 8 plum tomatoes.
yeah.
That's not
Yeah.
that many.
No, it's not. It's not. But again, this is if, these, it looks big, but that's probably, a half pint maybe. So, it's up to you how much you want to make. That's why I don't really, how I do it is at the end of the season, I go, ooh, what do I have? And then I just kind of go from there. Or if I buy a sale, if there's something the farmer's market has a sale. But yeah, I'm pretty loose with the, you do what works for you, This is a great little tip. So here's what you do. You boil your pasta, okay? While your pasta's boiling, you take the little can of tomato paste, right? And you heat up a thing, and then you take 1 ladleful of the pasta water, and you mix it with the tomato paste over heat, right? And then you throw in a little garlic, a little Italian seasonings, and if you want to throw in a little wine that makes it, fancy, and just, keep it going, for a little while, 10, 15 minutes or so, and you'll be surprised at how flavorful it is. You'll have a spaghetti sauce in 15 minutes that tastes like it's simmered all day. Yeah, it's really great. Yeah, I don't know where I learned that one, but it's I've done that several times. It's great for, like, there's a 4-year-old that comes to visit me all the time. Perfect, because I don't keep macaroni and cheese in the house. Like, I don't eat that stuff. But he does. But he'll eat this. Yeah.
What type of tomato paste would you be purchasing? Is there a certain brand?
So, it's funny you say I don't discriminate against tomato paste. I do on the canned tomatoes, but I've never even considered it with tomato paste, and I don't know why I've never considered it, but you've got me thinking about it now.
You just get the little can.
Just the little cans. I just grab, what I do? I just look for however many for $1 they are. Like sometimes they're 3 for $1 or something.
Well, I've
Yeah.
tried them all, and I stick with Constantine.
Okay, so we have a
Italian seasoning.
contadina person. Okay. Oh, you have with the seasonings in it. Yeah,
The sugar that's in it too.
There's sugar. There is sugar. You absolutely have to watch the sugar. So here, this is interesting. Who's the #1 producer of tomatoes in the world? What country? I heard Italy. Spain. It's China. And I spent 2 weeks in China, and they don't eat tomatoes. So why do they grow so many? They make tomato paste. So that's what, you know what I mean? So they use tomatoes as a product to grow and make other things out of it. But it's very rarely are there tomatoes in Chinese. Like, can you think of it? Have you seen even Americanized Chinese food? You really don't see that. Yet they're the largest producer of tomatoes, which I find fascinating. Yes? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what brands. They might not even sell them in this country. You know, that brands of tomato paste could be sold in other countries. I don't know. You know, yeah. So I don't know. But more stuff than you think comes from China. But I would assume our tomatoes probably don't. But I don't know.
Just curious, so could it be that they're grown in China and imported to the U.S.
that's part of it. That's part of it. I'm sure that happens. I'm sure we import giant batches that way. But China themselves also produce a lot of stuff. They do, yeah. Yeah. They're a manufacturing economy. That's, pretty much how they exist. So this came about. Now I have to admit, this one was never served at our dinner table. We didn't see this. But I do a lot of soup workshops. Some of you have come to my soup workshops, and they're actually, I could change my name to Therapy Soups instead of Therapy Kitchens or Therapy Gardens if I wanted to, because so many people like the soup stuff. So this recipe is actually from a woman in the audience. She was down in Marshfield, and she came up to me afterwards and she said, do a little research. She said, you'll see a lot of the old Italian soups call for lettuce. And so I did, and she's right, they do. Back in like times of famine and things like that, that's what they had. That's, and again, like that's, I've said this many times, like you'll hear people say, oh, it's peasant food. Well, I must have been a peasant I am a peasant because I like, so pizza was peasant food. Okay, I'll take it. That's kind of how I look at it. So the idea of whatever greens you had, you put them in the soup, and it was a very Italian thing. And then later on, it became escarole and, and things like that. Yeah, yeah. So as you look, at Italian soups, there's a lot that they're known for that I didn't realize. Like I see zuppa toscana. That's the third one. What do I think of when I see that? I think of Olive Garden, right? Isn't that their right? That's their signature soup, right? That everyone is always talking about. So, but I never saw that. But then it's from Tuscany, so that kind of gives you the idea that it's from a whole different area of the country than where my family came from. You look at minestrone. Minestrone is the one that's probably throughout the whole country. That's pretty much like their version of like our chicken soup, I guess you would say. And then you have the stale bread, the ribollita. That's a very common thing too in a lot of the peasant food type soups that you see. And then the pasta with chickpeas, the second to the bottom one. Do you see that one? Has anyone ever seen that before? It's good. It's actually, you have to like chickpeas. If you don't like chickpeas, it's not good. But it's pretty good. And then the last one, the Roman egg drop soup. That's the one with the ribbons of egg, kind of like in the egg drop soup, the Asian soups. It's almost the same thing where they run a ribbon of egg through it. So you can see a lot of the varied things just in the soups alone. Does anyone remember these? Right? Every single holiday, right? Okay, I see some heads. Oh, yeah. Every single holiday, these showed up. And as a matter, I was trying so hard, I wanted to bring these tonight. And I texted I was trying to get my aunt and my uncle to come. My uncle's 80, and he was my grandfather's son. And he felt he would be too emotional, so he didn't, I felt bad. I thought for sure he'd want to come, but I don't know. I think when you get that age, you don't want to necessarily always look back. But so I was texting with his wife, and I was like, I hated those cookies as a kid, but now I have to ask you, where did you get them? So she gave me a couple places, but they were already closed. Everything closes at like 5 o'clock now. I don't know what happened. Restaurants close at 8 o'clock now. But these are, so here's the thing. When I was a kid, I didn't like the anise. See that, the fourth one? I didn't like, as an adult, it doesn't bother me, but some people don't like it. You can just replace that. You can put almond extract. You could put vanilla. What's that? Much better with almond. Yeah. You can, yeah. The almond and the vanilla is better. This, again, this is if you don't like it, it's like that licorice taste, that dark licorice taste. So if you don't, that's kind of an acquired thing, But they're really easy to make, if you look at them. And the only thing with these is you have to you got to eat them pretty quick, or the confetti melts into the thing and it runs, and then you have like rainbow-looking frosting. But I do these. I mean, from my childhood, these were everywhere. And there was something else, and I'm trying to develop a workshop out of it. I don't know if it's going to get there. Sometimes they just don't quite make it. But I came across like I told you, I ended up with all the pictures. I also ended up with all the recipe books and the cards, all the recipe cards, which, by the way, a lot of it is overrated because you can't read the person's handwriting half the time. So it's more like a nostalgic thing. It's not necessarily usable, but some of them are. But so I came across this recipe that my grandmother used to bring it. Holiday, she brought it, and everyone hated it. And everyone told her they loved it. And I realized, every family has some story like this, right? And I realized now, I started thinking about it, and I'm like, that disappeared every year, but everyone hated it. And then I was like, my mother threw it away. I know she did when people turned their back. She must have. And it was the green Jell-O mold, right? So don't knock it. Who said that? So that took me to, I'll get on a little tangent. So then I was like, oh man, I want to do a workshop on like Jell-O molds and like stuff like that. So talk about it full circle. So I'm like looking for vintage cookbooks, right? You go to like the Salvation Army store, and people leave them there, whatever. And you remember they used to have pamphlets back in the day, right? Like that, churches had them, yeah. Libraries, you probably have a bunch of them here. And there's great stuff in there. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to call a used bookstore, right? So I called the Brattle Bookshop. Do you know them? Oh, yeah. Yeah, they're like the creme de la creme of bookshops, right? So I call and I go, hey, listen, I'm doing a thing on vintage cooking, and I'm looking for like some old cookbooks or pamphlets. And she goes, well, I just finished marking 2 boxes of pamphlets from what I would call the Jell-O era of America. And I said, I'll be right there. So I have about 10 pamphlets now. They put like whole chickens in Jell-O. I mean, like broccoli in Jell-O, like green Jell-O with broccoli was a thing. Like, right? Yeah. Shrimp is one of them. Yeah. So yeah. What is it? Aspic. Yeah, that's that colorful thing, right? Yeah. So anyway, so that these are, as a child, were a step above the green Jell-O, but not much. But as an adult, I tend to like them a little better,
Don't do a Jell-O workshop.
I don't think anyone would come to it because there's really no useful. What do you leave with? You had a laugh, but whatever. I'll work it into something. All right. So finally, the main event: my spaghetti sauce. And when I say I'm going to bring us right back to the beginning. And again, I'm a little slow. It took me to the age of 53 to figure this out. It's not my spaghetti sauce. This is a combination of all my family, all the way through. I tend to think of my grandfather as the first Italian, even though he was not. Like the whole family was Italian, but we moved, and I didn't see him a lot. So in my mind, he embodied what it meant to be Italian. He just did. The food he made and how he acted, and the things he was interested in. And I realized that I took a lot from him, how he did his cooking and his sauce, and then I took a lot from my mother, but I've also made it my own. But I also think, one of the things you're going to be surprised at how simple it is, because one of the things I did in making it my own is I've started realizing there's a lot of extraneous stuff that you don't need. And particularly a lot of these old recipes, you look at them and they're this long. And some of them you go through and you're like, okay, that's gone. I don't even know what that is anymore. So you have to kind of get to the modern age. So that's kind of what I did here. Part of that, I just said all that to assuage my own guilt. In case my grandfather was listening, But so this is how I do it. And again, I don't give amounts because I don't necessarily use amounts each time. I do with the marinara sauce, but I don't with this. So what I do with this is it's always whole San Marzano tomatoes, and I blend them, always. I never use crushed. And I do it for that reason that I said earlier. I don't know what the crushed looked like originally. I know what the whole ones look like when I open the can. Very, very, not only Italian, but very New England to start something with salt pork, right? So what you do for this is you fry if you have onions. Now I've eliminated onions. If you notice, there's no onions. So I actually I found the onions kind of took away from it. If anything, if I do want an onion flavor, I'll just half an onion and simmer it in there whole and then just fish it out at the end. But I don't even do that anymore. I haven't even missed it. But what I do is I do the salt pork and I render it down, and then I throw the garlic in there for a little while. And then if I'm using dried herbs, I throw that in there and just, 30 seconds, whatever. Then I start putting in all the other stuff, right? So I brown the country style pork ribs and they're bone in, right? I definitely use bone in for that. It absolutely creates a flavor in the sauce that you can't replicate. Then I always use a mix of hot and sweet sausages. And I just do that because that's just always what we've done. I don't know any other way. If I just did sweet, someone would say, where's the hot? So I just I do them both. And then I do either meatballs or the brajol. I don't do them both, mainly because they both involve a little like rolling and having to put them together and stuff. So it's not necessarily I don't want to have two red meats, it's just I'm lazy. So one of those two. I always use tomato paste. Almost any red sauce should have tomato paste. Even you'll see a lot of like new chefs now are saying, oh, you don't need it, you don't need it. That's what gives you the depth of flavor. That you need that tomato paste. That's why a lot of restaurants, when they brown bones and they roast bones and things, they brush it with tomato paste first to kind of caramelize a little bit. I use red wine, even though I gave up drinking about a year ago, and I was a little bit, and again, it wasn't, I did it more for health reasons than anything. But then I was like, oh, I wonder if I'm going to lose my taste for it. Like, I wonder if it'll taste weird to me now. And it didn't. I still like it. So that's good news. But you can, if you don't want to use wine, you can use water. You could use balsamic vinegar. You could use red wine vinegar. You could use beer. You could use white wine. I've used white wine many times. That's another thing. A lot of people will say, oh, red with tomatoes, white with fish. Like I don't subscribe to any of that. And I've used white wine, and it's a slightly different flavor, but not a lot, I definitely always use dried no matter what. Even if I have fresh herbs, I still put dried in there. I just like how they mix into the sauce anyway. I think they add a little color to the sauce too. That's not my picture. I just took that off the internet. So, but if I have fresh, I'll throw fresh in there too. But fresh, you always throw in at the end, right? You know that. So if any fresh herb, you don't need to simmer them long. In fact, they lose flavor over time. So what you really want to do is put them just before you serve, like the last 30 seconds of cooking, put your fresh herbs in, rip them up, and then serve it. And then almost any red sauce that I make now, I put a pinch of cayenne pepper. And no one has ever said, oh, this is hot or spicy, but I notice it when it's gone. And the reason is, now you'll see a lot of people put red pepper, right? Red pepper flakes. So they're two totally different types of heat on the tongue. If you think about cayenne, it's a warming back of the throat flavor. Like you taste it as you're eating. Whereas the red pepper is right in the front of your tongue. Bang, it hits you. So I prefer the warming one that kind of takes a little while to develop in the back. Salt and pepper to taste, and then you have to have the Parmesan cheese. You just have to. Yes?
Can I ask you about the tomatoes at the top?
Yep.
You say blended. How do you mean? My mother used to grind them.
You can so what a great question. Your mother was a woman after my own heart. Her mother would grind them, use the grinder, right? That they did to get the skins off. It ground them too, but that was also to remove the skins. The ones in the can, the skins were already gone. So I just literally dump them in a blender. Boom. I just put them right in a blender, yeah. Just blend them right, or if you have a hand blender, you can do that. And if you like a thicker sauce, you don't have to blend it. You can mash it. Some people do it by hand. They just take the whole tomatoes and break them up by hand. They like a kind of a thicker sauce like that.
And also, if I may, I was in the store the other day, and usually get Pasadena tomatoes because my friend had a restaurant. She made the best pizza.
Yeah.
What was that sauce? So that's what I get.
Okay.
But I did notice that other brand, Cento.
Cento. So I like so if you want to be true to Italy's roots or whatever, you want the Cento certified San Marzanos, and they say DOP on them. And there is a difference, and they're actually not that expensive. They're only like $6 a can, whereas the other ones are like almost $5 a can now. So, but I really really recommend that. San Marzanos, yeah, certified, and those are the ones that I said earlier. They're grown in. The ash, the volcanic ash has done something to the soil. So I started by saying, we used to go to their house every Sunday for dinner, right? So and I fished all around and fished all around. And like I said, for some reason, I'm the keeper of the pictures. But that one on the left, that's the only one I could find of the dining room table at my grandfather's house. So that's my grandmother on the left. That's my mother on the right. I'm assuming that's me, the little boy there. And that lady used to live downstairs for my grandparents. Her name was Addie. And I remember when I was a kid, I used to run around and say, the Germans are coming. And my grandmother would go, stop it, she's German. Don't say that. And then up on the upper right, that's actually at my mom's house, which now is my house. And those are the dinners that I remember. Those are the Sunday things that I remember. And if you look particularly at the one on the left, I'm really angry at my brother over this. Do you see you can just see the pattern here. And do you see them here? Do you remember the old farmhouse dishes? Everyone had them. Everyone had them. They're green and white. Sometimes they're red and white. Sometimes they're blue and white. Do you remember those? So my brother has them. They were my grandmother's, and he won't give them to me. And he won't give them to me because he just doesn't feel like digging them out, is what he says to me. I don't want to go up the attic, whatever. So I was telling my aunt, again, sometimes guys get obsessed with older guys. So I'm obsessed with these dishes. And I'm telling my poor 70-something-year-old aunt, I'm like, I want these dishes. Why won't he give me these dishes? Blah, blah, blah. And she goes, what do you want? I was like, it's a family heirloom. I want it. And she goes, she got them at Stop and Shop. They gave them away free if you spent and I was like, really? I didn't even know. I thought they were these fancy, our dishes. But actually, that makes them even better. I think, you know what? She waited and collected one a week, right? I mean, that makes them even cooler. That's it. I'm getting those dishes. So I hope you enjoyed yourself. It was nice of me to be able to share a little bit of kind of my family, how we ate and some of the recipes, but happy to send them to you if you want them. So thank you very much. All right. Thank you.
What's in the jar up there?
So this is Ann made bruschetta. So help yourself, come up and, Ann made some homemade bruschetta.